Hi, I'm Kristen Goodwin. On this episode of the Fox News Rundown, while President Biden will make his first primetime address this week, marking 1 year since the nation began rolling out coronavirus restrictions, he has yet to hold a formal news conference since taking office. Host of Media Buzz and the Media BuzzMeter podcast, Kurtz, weighs in on calls for the commander-in-chief to do a back and forth with reporters and the relationship with the press and the current and former president. Texas Governor Greg Abbott slamming the Biden administration for what he calls a growing crisis at the U.S Mexico border caused by a surge in migrant arrivals. GOP Congressman Tony Gonzales of Texas shares his thoughts on President Biden's border policies and how he says the U.S. can improve its immigration system. Plus commentary from Fox News contributor Pastor Robert Jeffress. The Fox News Rundown is a daily news podcast where we take a deeper look at the stories important to you. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast player by going to foxnewspodcast.com.
I'm Dana Perino.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
I'm Shannon Bream, and this is the Fox News Rundown.
Wednesday, March 10th, 2021. I'm Dave Anthony. President Biden will address the nation tomorrow night, but he still hasn't faced the media in a full-length news conference.
There is more to the presidency than just reading off the teleprompter, and I think it's our responsibility to be aggressive. I don't think this press corps has given Joe Biden a terribly hard time, but to be more aggressive with every president. And it's the president's responsibility to let reporters ask the questions that they ask.
I'm Lisa Brady. After paying a visit to the southern border, a Texas congressman has a message.
You have to understand this isn't a challenge. It is a crisis.
And I'm Robert Jeffress. I've got the final word on the Fox News Rundown.
If you count Inauguration Day, this is the 50th day President Biden has been in office, and he's facing mounting criticism for not yet having a big news conference to answer all sorts of questions on all sorts of topics. By comparison, President Trump had his after 28 days, 34 for George W. Bush. It only took President Obama 21 days back when Joe Biden was VP. Tomorrow, he'll address the nation after the Democratic-led Congress approves the nearly $2 trillion COVID financial aid bill.
During his first primetime address, he'll talk about COVID, what we've been through as a country, and what the path forward looks like, and we'll focus on the next address once we get through that.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki says a news conference will happen by the end of the month.
It's getting to be a pretty big deal. Now, nobody expected Joe Biden to be anything like Donald Trump when it came to dealing with the press.
Kurtz is the host of Media Buzz on the Fox News channel.
The former president, for all of his contentious relationships with the arbiters of what he called fake news, talked to reporters several times a day. That was unusual. But I'm surprised that the current president is only taking a couple of questions at a time, maybe 2 or 3 times a week. And I think it's hard to avoid the conclusion, it certainly helps with the White House message discipline, that his aides, his advisors, his handlers prefer this because if he does have a lengthy news conference, which he will soon, inevitably, but I don't think he's going to have many of them, that he might go off script, that he might commit a gaffe, that he might step into a blunder, and that would take him and the White House off message.
They do have blunders and times where he's gone off message, even during the presidential campaign, to fall back on as reasons to do that, right?
Yeah, and look, Biden is not an inspirational speaker. I actually think he does fine with the press. Most of the time, he has a good substantive knowledge of government, having been around for decades. But, dealing with the media, even when the media are being obnoxious or hostile or rude or any of the other adjectives you might pick, is part of the job. He's not always going to just get to do friendly chats with Anderson Cooper and sit for interviews with his wife for People magazine. And I think that there are a lot of missed opportunities for President Biden here because, I often use this phrase, you got to be able to show whether you're a candidate, a governor, a mayor, or the president of the United States that can hit major league pitching. You stand up to tough questioning, you get your message out, and then you counter any negative aspects of coverage that are out there. Maybe as Biden grows more comfortable, maybe as we come out of the pandemic, he'll do it more. But I think he's always going to be more reticent than certainly his predecessor.
Well, the other day we had that kind of odd moment where he was talking with the House Speaker and they were talking about the COVID relief bill.
So I want to thank you all. I really mean it from the bottom. I want to thank you
Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm happy to take questions if that's what I'm supposed to do, Nance, whatever you want me to do.
And then the feed gets cut. I mean, that looked really odd.
Yeah, that was no accident, because obviously, in that instance, maybe he was more willing to take questions than his staff had expected. Look, there are times, we've all seen the videotape, when Biden can get testy with reporters. He tends to be long-winded, which is a tendency that he's battled for a long time. But I do think, he has a responsibility. It's an accountability question to regularly take questions from the president. When you only allow 2 questions, you're getting kind of like the quick pop of the day, and then he walks off, and you don't get topics that he might prefer not to talk about, such as the growing migrant crisis at the border. He obviously wants to stay focused on COVID and the economy. And look, he's giving a speech later this week. Any president enjoying the triumph of what's going to be his first major legislative accomplishment, especially with the spending of $2 trillion, especially in the middle of a pandemic, would be guilty of a political malpractice if he didn't give a speech. But there is more to the presidency than just reading off the teleprompter, and I think it's our responsibility to be aggressive. I don't think this press corps has given Joe Biden a terribly hard time, but to be more aggressive with every president. And it's the president's responsibility to let reporters ask the questions that they ask, sometimes a little grandstanding, of course, on behalf of the public.
You talked about earlier hostile or combative media. There was a lot of that, of course, with the Trump press secretaries having their time with the press. Have you seen that with Jen Psaki? Do you think they're as dogged as they had been in the prior administration asking questions?
There is simply no question that Jen Psaki's press briefings are more civil, that the temperature in the briefing room has been lowered compared to what Sean Spicer went through, compared to what Sarah Huckabee Sanders went through, and most recently Kayleigh McEnany. That's in part because of the way she conducts herself. She says that Biden has told her that tone is very important, so she will push back, and a couple of times she has, kind of challenged the premise of a question, but she tries not to make it personal. And of course, she's not working for a president who talks about the media or some of the media as the enemy of the American people. At the same time, I think the press, broadly speaking, agrees with a lot of what Biden is trying to do, has broadly supported the COVID relief bill, for example, and some of the Trump policies that he's reversing. I do think there have been instances in which the coverage has gotten more critical. To me, the most dramatic example of that was when President Biden failed to do really much of anything in response to releasing the report that showed that the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, had played a central role in the killing of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. And suddenly you had not only more aggressive questioning, but you had liberal columnists, denouncing the president who had indicated he would take a tougher line towards Saudi Arabia. So there are exceptions, but by and large, this press corps is giving him an easier time. He also might still be in the honeymoon phase. But as the border problems and, unforeseen problems around the world would suggest, and history would suggest, there's going to come a time when he's going to hit some rough patches. And then I think he might be a little more motivated to get out there and do more interviews, because it's not just news conferences, it's a number of interviews with both print and TV reporters when he's a little bit more on the defensive.
Now we switch gears. There's a new Fox Nation special that features Howie Kurtz and many others remembering a conservative icon.
The fourth branch of government. Rush Limbaugh with talent on loan from God.
It's titled The Age of Rush, about the late radio talk show host.
Most people who were conservative did not have validation in the media for their ideas. Hollywood made fun of them, still does, in movies. Songs made fun of them, musicians and so forth. Here I come, and I simply validated what everybody else already felt.
It's narrated by former Vice President Mike Pence, one of many Rush inspired to become a talk show host, and then later a congressman, a governor, and VP.
His 3-hour radio show was a revelation for listeners who'd never heard this type of radio before.
It's a 4-part series on Fox Nation starting today.
Well, it's very happy to be included because I've covered Rush and have talked to Rush a few times, pretty much since he became a national figure with a radio show that became just transformed the media landscape. So what I think of, first of all, is this is a guy who essentially saved AM radio, who invented the national talk show format. Before Rush Limbaugh, there were talkers, opinionated people doing talk shows, but they were local. There was somebody in your town. Rush Limbaugh showed you could do it on a national basis. And well beyond that, his impact on the conservative movement, his influence among members of Congress and presidents. He wasn't originally a fan of George H.W. Bush, but after a sleepover at the White House became more supportive. Certainly his strong support of Donald Trump showed the power of his words, because when you think about what Rush Limbaugh accomplished, it wasn't a TV show with a lot of fancy graphics or a lot of big-name guests. It was one guy sitting in the microphone 3 hours a day taking calls from the so-called ditto heads. And that, I think, influenced not just the radio business. I think it influenced the cable news business, and cable news on all the networks eventually, and especially in primetime, but also during the day, became a lot more opinionated, and I think that's part of the legacy of Rush.
Well, obviously he was a big part, gave a lot of credit for the conservative Republican revolution in 1994 when the GOP took back the House. Do you think that the Fox News channel would have launched when it did if Rush Limbaugh's show didn't exist?
I think probably. I do think he showed that there was a hunger, an appetite, a void for conservative analysis and opinion, and that's why his show, in the more than 600 stations and so forth, became so incredibly popular. So I think it may have at least provided a roadmap for a more right-leaning national network, and now there's more than just Fox, to show that there was, many people on the right felt that the mainstream media didn't understand them, didn't get them, didn't respect them, and we still have some of that today. Now, at the same time, in what I've said and written about Rush Limbaugh, I've had to point out that he made mistakes. He had the addiction to painkillers. He at times insulted people with very offensive language. In one instance, he went after a young student on the issue of birth control at Georgetown Law School and had to apologize. So he was a polarizing figure, a lightning rod. That was by design. And the other thing that Limbaugh did is, early in his radio career, he would not just denounce the media, he would go after individual journalists by name. Now, that's very commonplace today, especially on places like Twitter, but at the time, it was pretty unusual. And again, it spoke to a resentment and a distrust of the media by many conservatives that he tapped into.
You were at the Washington Post for the years his show was growing up and becoming the big juggernaut that it was. What was it like in the newsroom? Did people listen? Did people pay attention to his criticism?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, since his show was on in the middle of the day, and most people weren't sitting at their desks with radios, they didn't listen. It wasn't like you could go online, even when there wasn't online, right away and find out what he had said. There was no transcripts. But you would always know if Rush had gone after you. And he took a few whacks at me. We had a sort of a sometimes sparring, but definitely respectful relationship. My voicemail would explode. My answering service would explode with people saying, who didn't know me, had never read what I'd written on that particular day, who said, Rush Limbaugh's right, you're a communist, you're a horrible human being. And I would have to chuckle because that was, his fans using the phone lines to make their feelings known. And I think there was too much of a tendency on the part of the mainstream media to dismiss Rush Limbaugh as a kind of almost like a fringe figure, but he was anything but. And by the time of his death, sadly, from cancer, even though a lot of the obituaries were pretty hostile to Rush Limbaugh, which did not surprise me, there certainly was a recognition about what a titan he was in the broadcasting business, and giving him his due as somebody who really did change the course of communication.
His listeners always felt like he was one of us. Like he somehow he was with them. They were all together in some group.
Yeah, look, he's a guy who grew up in Missouri, knocked around the business. He was a publicist for the Kansas City Royals, so he really was a kind of a self-made person. You also have to remember that Rush told me, and he said in numerous interviews, that he was an entertainer first and a conservative second. And a lot of, after Rush's success, there was Air America and other liberal attempts. Mario Cuomo had a show at one point to try to have left-wingers compete on radio, and they couldn't do it. And mostly they couldn't do it because they were boring. So Rush was funny. I mean, if he went after you or people of your community, you thought he was perhaps unfair and harsh, but he had a way of keeping people listening that always struck me, and I think that's because he understood that if you had to get people in the tent if you were going to kind of preach the gospel to them.
Howie Kurtz, host of Media Buzz on the Fox News Channel, Media BuzzMeter podcast. Thank you very much for joining us.
Great to talk to you.
This is Robert Jeffress with your Fox News commentary. Coming up.
The Biden White House is facing daily questions and mounting pressure over what it calls a challenge on the southern border.
We have a large number of kids, unaccompanied children who are coming across the border.
White House spokeswoman Jen Psaki refers questions about the actual number of migrants to Homeland Security. But a senior DHS official tells Fox News the number of migrant children in custody has tripled over the past 2 weeks to more than 3,000, with over 1,000 held at detention facilities along the border for longer than they're supposed to be, which is no more than 3 days.
We are continuing to work to convey to people in the region that this is not the time to come, that the majority of people who come to the border will be turned away, which is factually accurate.
For the children, Psaki says the goal is to move them out of Border Patrol facilities as quickly as possible. But she concedes right now they don't have enough facilities for the amount of children crossing the border. President Biden recently sent a team of senior advisors to the region, but so far the White House continues to assess the situation while working to build from what it considers a dismantled immigration policy. Meantime, Customs and Border Patrol tells Fox News some tactical checkpoints in Arizona have been closed temporarily so manpower can be redirected.
There is a crisis on the Texas border right now.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott visiting the border city of Mission on Tuesday and accusing President Biden of open border policies.
It invites illegal immigration and is creating a humanitarian crisis in Texas right now that will grow increasingly worse by the day.
Abbott says cartels exploit the situation by trying to overwhelm Border Patrol officials, and he's deploying troopers and National Guard troops to assist. But he says more ICE detention facilities, immigration and customs enforcement, are needed immediately.
I am on the border literally every single week. And, this Biden's border crisis is worse than people realize.
Texas Republican Congressman Tony Gonzales serves a district that includes over 800 miles of border territory. He recently had a ride-along with Border Patrol, met with local officials, and paid a visit to a facility criticized during the Trump administration, but now reopened under President Biden.
I was just at the Carrizo Springs facility for unaccompanied minors, and what I saw was just busting at the seams. I mean, the numbers that are coming through unaccompanied minors is through the roof. And I also was able to meet with Border Patrol agents, and they're resilient. They're dedicated to this, to ensuring that our borders are secure. But we also got to remember that they're regular people, just like everyone else. They're fathers, they're mothers, and for them to see and have to deal with all these unaccompanied minors, it takes a toll on them as well. So it is 100% a crisis that is spinning out of control, and we need more visibility on it.
Now, the Biden administration calls the Trump administration's approach, especially when it comes to the kids, inhumane. But, I guess the difference is, as you're pointing out, the numbers. And the current administration calls it a challenge, not a crisis, but they are admitting that they don't have the capacity to handle the numbers right now. They're holding some of the kids longer than 72 hours because they don't have the facilities to send them to. What would your message to this administration be? I mean, if they consider the previous policies immoral and inhumane, obviously they're not going to reinstate them now that they've revoked them.
Yeah, the Biden administration has been adamant on doing one thing: reversing all of Trump's policies. That's not a plan, and at the same breath, they were pushing this open border rhetoric. What did you think was going to happen? And then they go as far as being absent from the scene. Like they just want the problem to go away while they started a lot of these issues. What they have to do is they got to go back to some of the Trump policies that worked. That's one. They got to give resources to the people that are doing the work. Border Patrol agents, sheriffs, police officers. And we have to start enforcing our laws. And then we got to start talking about legal immigration and not have this open borders amnesty discussion that it just encourages the rhetoric. But at first, they have to show up. We need the Biden administration to show up. My message to them is work with those that are on the ground every single day, like myself, like Henry Cuellar, like Vicente Gonzales, us that are on the border that see it every single day.
There's a big difference between the way the administration is describing even that facility that you saw, the Carrizo Springs facility, and the way Democrats were calling it kids in cages when President Trump was in office. On the ground, is there a difference? Were you able to get inside and see it?
I was able to get inside and see it. And the reason why I wanted to do it were a couple of reasons. Is one, it's critical to understanding what is happening on the border. That's one. Two is to really be able to see what kind of conditions these children were in. And so this facility is an old man camp. And a man camp is basically an oil and gas area where they build out these hardened structures. And it reminded me a lot of like military dorms, if you will. And I was able to speak with some of the migrants as well, you know, kind of just to ask about their interaction. They all were from Central America, Honduras, El Salvador, Guatemala, and that was key there. But, you know, they had abilities to worship. They had abilities to, you know, facilities for learning and education, all those type of things. But here's the deal. This facility does not want to house these people beyond, you know, the time that they're allowed. They don't want to have that. You know, they want the border to kind of calm down, and that starts by leadership from the Biden administration to calm some of the open border rhetoric down.
The administration says they're telling people not to come right now. Is that a message that's not getting through? Had any of the, recently arrived migrants that you spoke with heard that they're telling people not to come?
You know, when you spend the campaign kind of pushing this open borders rhetoric, you know, governing is a lot different than campaigning. And that's what they're seeing. They're having to govern this problem set that has been around, honestly, a very long time. So part of that is their actions need to echo, like actions speak louder than words. One of the things that, and I'll be very specific, I'll talk about policy here for a second. So one of the things that the Biden administration did is they did away with the PACER program. And the PACER program allowed judges to make determinations immediately on the border whether, you know, people were deemed, you know, whether they fell under this fear or not, right? And that was one avenue in which you could immediately return migrants that did not qualify for asylum. Well, the administration did away with that. So guess what? Of course, the numbers are going to go through the roof. So that's one of the areas they could immediately take place. Bring back the PACER program. And this is not just me saying this. This is people on the ground that are seeing it every day. The Border Patrol agents, CBP, they're saying this PACER program worked.
But is there concern, too, on the other side of that argument that, you know, people who are coming from countries that have hardships, gang violence, food shortages, which can be, you know, weather-related or pandemic-related, driving them just out of desperation to seek a better life, maybe they don't meet that fear index under the PACER program. You know, there was concern, I guess, that maybe they would slip through the cracks and be sent back, even if they did have a good hardship case, to plead to a judge. I mean, you know, is there something our government should be doing to help assist countries like Honduras, for instance, to try to stem the flow? I know there have been campaigns in multiple administrations to do that on some level. Is it just not effective?
You know, the long-term solution is improving our legal immigration system. Like, that process is broken. And I think one way that you could start is, increasing the number of work visas. We absolutely need to know who's coming into our country. But if folks want to come here for a better life, to fill jobs that are otherwise going unfilled, then I think there's an avenue to do that. But that's not what the administration is doing. They're not working with anybody. They're not talking to anybody. Republicans, Democrats, they just have this approach of, we're going to do everything opposite of what the Trump administration did. And guess what? That has led us to the crisis that we're in today.
Yeah, I mean, White House spokesman Jen Psaki keeps describing it as a policy decision to let especially the unaccompanied minors come in. really basically making a compassionate argument there. But that doesn't change the fact that when you've got much bigger numbers coming in, you've got an issue, which they're still not calling a crisis. But where do you see this heading? I mean, is this destined to be just a campaign issue in the 2022 midterms, or is there something that the administration can be doing to work with Congress? Is it almost too late to try to turn this current problem of a big surge at the border around?
So this is what I'm seeing on the border, is you have communities, and remember, immigration isn't a new issue, right? So you have folks that have grown up with this. They've been around their entire lives in this, in some form or fashion. Those communities that reside on the border, like Eagle Pass, like Del Rio, like Presidio, like El Paso, right? So this isn't anything new. So they're compassionate. They want to be able to help people that are coming over here for some of the reasons that you mentioned earlier. But what has happened is the numbers are so large, so drastic, that they're unable to help. They're unable to handle the numbers in which are happening. So what you're seeing is these failed cities, if you will, because of the sheer volume of folks coming over. And it's just the wrong thing to do all around. And the administration has to step up. The administration has to, one, not put their head in the sand. Like they have to understand this isn't a challenge. It is a crisis. And that's great that the administration finally sent some people out there, but the president should be out there. The vice president should be out there seeing it firsthand, having the discussion firsthand, implementing some of these laws and coming up with solutions, not just saying everything is okay.
Texas Republican Congressman Tony Gonzales, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you again for having me on.
I'm Guy Benson. Join me weekdays at 3 p.m. Eastern as we break down the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest newsmakers and guests. Listen live on the Fox News app or get the free podcast at GuyBensonShow.com.
Rate and review the Fox News Rundown on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen.
It's time for your Fox News commentary.
Robert Jeffress.
What's on your mind?
A Pew Research study came out this week with encouraging news. The percentage of Americans who plan to get a COVID vaccine has gone up in the last few months from 60% to almost 70% today. There is one group, however, that continues to refuse the vaccine: Republican evangelicals. Evangelicals were also reportedly the least likely to say that the health of others was an important consideration in their decision. Some commentators have warned that evangelicals' refusal to get the vaccine could possibly prevent the country from reaching herd immunity, prolonging the course of the pandemic. As an evangelical pastor, I find these trends to be disturbing. Evangelical Christians should be lining up to get the vaccine, not crossing their arms and refusing it. Too many Christians have set up a false dichotomy between faith and science. There is no conflict between God and true science. In fact, it was the Christian worldview that led to some of the most important breakthroughs in science and technology. Isaac Newton, Francis Bacon, Louis Pasteur, and Blaise Pascal were all people of faith who believed in the orderly universe made by God, the Creator. The orderliness of nature makes it possible to study and understand the world. A chaotic or random universe would not have allowed for a reliable vaccine. This is why I've been calling the vaccines a miracle from God. God is the one who holds the universe together at each and every moment. God's common grace made it possible for human minds to devise life-saving medical treatments like vaccines. It's distressing to me that Republican evangelicals are far and away the most distrustful of the vaccines. This shows that politics is shaping faith instead of faith shaping our politics. Too many people seem to be using this twisted logic. Republicans don't get vaccines. I'm a Republican, so I won't get a vaccine. This is the height of silliness. A political loyalty should not override good sense and Christian love. At the end of the day, refusal to consider the vaccines reveals a chronically individualistic outlook on life for too many evangelical Christians. Rugged individualism may be a classic American ideal, but it has little to do with the Christian gospel. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul commands Christians, do not merely look out for your own interest, but for the interest of others. Have the same attitude in you that was in Christ Jesus. One of the basic premises of Christianity is that life is not just about me, it's about us. We should evaluate every decision, including whether to take the vaccine, by how it might affect those around us. To my fellow evangelicals, answer these questions honestly. Are you refusing the vaccine for a serious reason, because of your conscience? Or are you playing politics and flirting with conspiracy theories? I would ask you to reconsider your position, not just for yourself, but for the sake of those around you. I'm urging the 14,000 members of our church to be vaccinated as soon as possible, and I hope many others will follow suit. The health of our churches and our nation may depend upon it. This is Robert Jeffress for Fox News.
You've been listening to the Fox News Rundown. Stay up to date by subscribing to this podcast at foxnewspodcasts.com. And for up-to-the-minute news, go to foxnews.com. Fox News Radio on demand on the Fox News app. Download the app and just click listen. When you swipe left, you can listen to your favorite Fox News talk shows live. Swipe right for the latest Fox News Radio newscasts on demand. Fox News Radio on the Fox News app. Download it today.
Love Fox News? Click the subscribe button to get more of the news and opinion you trust. And click the Fox News Rundown playlist for the latest episodes.